For today. The guest is Dr. DBurris-Kitchen from Tennessee State University, and she's talking about the criminal justice system in the United States. And of course, Dr. Kitchen, before we had our final commercial break, we promised that we'd give you an opportunity to continue talking about the institutionalization of racism in a real sense, that how that the whole issue is a part of and partial in a real sense of our society. So let's look at it from that perspective.
Well, where I kind of left off was the fact that all of a sudden the civil rights legislation was passed, and there are new freedoms for African Americans and other oppressed members of our society. But it was 1970. I mean, it wasn't even 5, maybe 6 years after this that the Nixon administration put an all-out affront on the war on drugs. And the war on drugs became a criminalization of black people. I mean, drugs meant black, black meant crime, drugs and crime meant let's lock up black people. And it was never this intense until the 70s. And what concerns me about that is once the de jure segregation and discrimination is gone, now all of a sudden you've got institutionalized racism. You've got the medial portrayal of the people who do drugs are African Americans. They're the people to fear as a group, not just, you know, we got to fear a person who does drugs, but we've got to fear the black male, because the black male is the drug dealer who's out killing people for drugs or killing people to sell drugs, and that's who we have to be careful about. So all of a sudden we've got a bunch more police officers in the street looking for the drug dealer who is African American male, supposedly, but that's not reality. Reality was not that that's who was selling drugs. Self-report studies on drug sales and drug use from 1970s on, which was data collected by the Michigan Alcohol and Other Drugs Survey for years, said that self-report studies say that white European American males are the ones who are the drug dealers and the drug users at a much higher rate than African American males. But the image of the media and the image of the political arena was that it was the African American male. So the African American male became the threat to the white population and the white politician and the white criminal justice system. So once that happened, more legislation continued to be passed that was about the war on drugs, and every president from Nixon on, that's what they fought for up until Barack Obama's administration. The war on drugs wasn't even really mentioned much at all, and this, because of the economy was so bad, I think other people wanted to hear other things besides the war on drugs. But any politician who ran for political office from the 70s on could not talk about the war on drugs and not talk about crime in general.
Troubled cities.
Right, or they would not, or troubled cities, or they would not have gotten elected. You had to say, what am I doing about crime? And you had to say, what am I doing specifically about the drug dealers on the street that are shooting each other? And that image of that drug dealer was an African American male. So what are you doing about the inner city streets in America? What are you doing about the Detroits? What are you doing about the Chicagos? What are you doing about the LAs? So ever since then, we've had legislation that's been passed that's been revolving around this particular interest. And I think the most damaging was the crime control bill, which said if you got 5 grams of, just 5 grams of crack cocaine, you've got a mandatory minimum of 5 years in prison versus 500 grams of heroin versus 100 grams of regular cocaine. Well, we all know that cocaine is cocaine, whether it comes in the form of powder cocaine or rock. But we focused on, okay, we've got to get the people who have crack, and they're going to get, for 5 grams of crack, they're going to get the same time as someone who has 100 grams or 500 grams of cocaine or heroin. And the person who we saw as the crack dealer, specifically in the 80s, was the African American male. So all of a sudden we've got all these people out on the streets looking for the crack dealer who was only looking in African American communities. That's where the law enforcement officers were put. Clinton's administration in the 90s also passed crime control legislation to put 100,000 more police officers on the street. Of course, that crime control legislation, 100,000 police officers went where? To
did that ever materialize? Did they